Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Silo. Season 1 Episode 6 is called The Relic. So full spoilers for the episode, and I don't know guys, I am struggling with this. I wasn't super hot in the last two episodes, and I think this episode just further made me feel just disconnected to the show. It's revolving largely around the characters and their drama. Primarily this episode, it's Juliet's kind of relationship with George, with some flashbacks to like their tender moments together, and there's a revelation in the present day story about maybe George not being such a great guy, and that he was possibly just using her for her skills, for her access to things, and that he's maybe got a history of doing this before with other women. This was all a bit tedious to me. I think I can be on board with an introspective episode. In fact, some shows that are really well written, sometimes the introspective episodes can be the ones that I end up liking the most. If I'm really into the characters and I'm really into what each episode is saying about the characters and how it's analyzing them and taking them forward. But I would not say the characters in Silo have been its strong point, and that's been kind of clear to me over the last couple of episodes. This episode revolving so heavily on that aspect of it, to the point where when we started getting flashbacks at the start of this episode, I was thinking, are we still doing flashbacks to her and George? And to be honest, very little of these flashbacks I felt gave us anything this episode. They all felt like filler to me. The only real relevant thing in the whole chunk of it was there's one flashback where she kind of makes fun of him for seemingly not having any friends except her. And that kind of sets up almost the dramatic gut punch of, oh no, that's a lie. He actually does have not only other friends, he literally has a girlfriend up somewhere, right? In the silo. So they were going for something with that, but by and large, we've already focused so heavily on him giving her this watch that actually seeing the moment where he gives her it, then the moment where she's fixed it, them lying together and just talking about the big ideas, and it's all just very vague and general, oh, what if everything was a lie, and what if this, what if that. None of it's really doing anything, and it was fine as an introduction to these characters at a certain point, but fundamentally we're spending so much time on discovering who George was, and I don't think George is that interesting. He really isn't. He felt like a MacGuffin. He was a character MacGuffin. He served a purpose for other characters earlier in the show, and here we are after two episodes I would describe as having just kind of really dull, mediocre investigation stuff. We have more of that investigation stuff, but now we're specifically investigating who he was, and I don't think that's that interesting. He's never really been that compelling on his own. The big gut punch of the episode is supposed to be how this makes Juliet feel, because she's feeling like she's been lied to. But to be honest, when she goes to interview this woman who turns out to be Georgie's girlfriend or ex-girlfriend or whatever, when this woman starts kind of recognizing that Juliet, because she's wearing the watch, is clearly Georgie's next girlfriend or next mark, if you will, honestly, when she said, I'm his girlfriend, I just kind of groaned a little bit, because immediately I was like, oh, we're doing, it's not quite love triangle stuff, but it's kind of adjacent to it. It's almost getting into that territory, where we spend this entire scene with Juliet looking more and more distressed as she's hearing that the guy she loved and thought was great and loved her might have been using her and was just a scumbag who was out for his own gains. He cares about nothing, and you could almost imagine that there is a good character somewhere that you could write who's obsessed so much with finding the truth that every single person he encounters is just a means to that end. You could actually do an interesting character with someone like that, but I don't think that we really see enough interesting things about George, especially since it spends a lot of its time, this show, concealing what George knew and what he saw and what he was aware of. And that's the other big thing, is that obviously the mystery and what this place is the most compelling part of the show. In particular, just how it came to be, what its functions are, and to an extent, really just what life is like in this place because it's cut off, because they don't know about the rest of the world, because they don't know simple things. You know, the science fiction of it is the interesting part. But they're kind of more and more treating it as this just very, very bland mystery box, where this episode's a great example where, you know, the majority of the episode is the mundane thing the show's become, which is the investigation and the character stuff, which is not that compelling. And then it tries to give you the hook at the end of, but here's a thing that relates to like the truth and the secrets and the overall science fiction. And, you know, we get this relic, this book that this woman has, which is a kid's like travel book. It's, you know, it's like photos of the ocean and photos of like nature and stuff. And like, yeah, conceptually I like the idea of this, of Juliet seeing all of these images for the first time. I was just speaking last time about not knowing what stars were and how that was really fascinating. And yeah, in a vacuum, this scene is quite interesting, but when the music started and it was kind of like going for the heartstrings and like, oh, this is exciting, isn't it? Because this is like what we're all here for. I kind of felt a little bit, I felt a little bit like a used car salesman had like taken me for a ride. Like, we're giving you a little taste of what you actually want, but you had to sit through all this other shit first, which is a problem in and of itself. Like, if the character drama was compelling and if these characters were actually worth, and the investigation stuff wasn't just this tedious generic, I'm just going to say it, this is like a Netflix show. Especially the fact that it was kind of interesting for a couple episodes and then is declined into this really slow pacing where it feels like we're now just doing everything we can to save money. And the fact that we've even killed off all the other interesting characters it's just a testament to that. And don't get me wrong, Rebecca Ferguson's still a solid actor and she's still definitely the most engaging one, but everything she's encountering, everything she's surrounded by, you know, talking to the guy with the beard trying to get a name for like the relic dealer, which leads them to this woman, this girlfriend of George's, like all of that is like, give us a name. Like, this scene goes on for like 3-4 minutes of them just trying to convince him to actually say something and tell them where to go. And that's all it is. It's 3 or 4 minutes devoted to where do we go to talk to the next person. Nothing about it is actually that interesting. This character isn't get anything going for him on his own. He's not someone that we've come to care about, or anything like that. So it's just dangling the next plot beat. It's dangling the next MacGuffin without anything to actually make each individual scene compelling on its own. And then even, you know, I'll give it a little bit of credit. It tries to make Billings like a bit more fleshed out this episode by him getting frustrated. Well, one, he kind of doesn't immediately turn on Juliet because it's clear that she had a romantic involvement with George, and he doesn't, you know, he kind of like tries to give her an out on that by saying, hey, that woman was crazy, all that stuff she was saying, right? And then they do the thing where it's revealed that he's got the syndrome, right? Which I don't even know if I've talked about yet. It was mentioned early on in the show, but he's got the syndrome, he's got the shakes, and he's doing something illegal by not reporting that, and his wife does know about it. But he says he's got a wife and a kid, and I couldn't help but feeling, because we get a scene soon after this where he goes home and we see him with his wife and kid, and I thought, would this not have been more effective if he didn't just say in the scene that he has a wife and kid and we just saw it in the next scene where it's like, oh, that sort of adds an extra layer to him, that he not only has a wife and kid, but the wife knows that he's got this condition and is actively trying to help him with it. It's still all there, don't get me wrong, but I thought it'd have been more of an effective reveal. You know, again, storytelling is how you convey the information. It's when you convey certain pieces of information. And I feel like that would have just hit a little bit more, just to like not be aware of that when he was arguing with Juliet, and then just see it afterwards that he's got someone that he confides in. That could have been a little bit better, but I mean, him having the syndrome, like, this is again another little nugget that I do find a little interesting, in that I'm pretty convinced at this point that the syndrome that they effectively send people either outside or down into the mines for, because they don't want it spreading, or they don't want people with the syndrome doing anything important because they got the shakes. I'm pretty convinced at this point that this is a harmless, like, medical condition. That it's probably not a big deal. It's something that if we actually ever find out what it actually is, and maybe it's already obvious to people who know medical conditions what this is, but I suspect this is actually something that we know in the real world that's actually quite common, and probably not a huge deal, as opposed to something that is more serious. And that's like the sad irony of it, is that they're taking this thing as if it's this almost leprosy they have to, like, fight against by exiling people who have it, when in reality it's like not a big deal, and maybe it's something in the real world that a couple pills would just take care of and no one would ever really care. But yeah, so yeah, I'm really struggling with the show right now. I found this episode to be a slog to get through. We have so many of these flashbacks with Juliet and George that, like, again, George was fine to serve his purpose in the plot, right, to sort of be this gateway into things, but the only thing that made George remotely interesting was what he might have already known because of the different things that he's found, right? George himself was never that interesting. His motivations for doing this were never that interesting. So, like, even like trying to give a shit about that now is quite tough. And then the episode, like, tries to do this thing where Juliet's about to throw in the towel and go back down to maintenance, and it's the old broad on the walkie-talkie who gives her this speech about, you were just doing this for him, not because it was the right thing to do. Maybe you should stick it out. There's an old photograph of her and someone, maybe teasing her past, that I'm sure the show will get into at some point. But fundamentally, it was kind of hard to get invested in a lot of this, because it kind of felt like Juliet just kind of flip-flopped a little bit. Like, I understood why she was feeling demoralized at this point, because obviously, the person she thought she cared about and he cared about her turns out to maybe be a big big lie, potentially. But then she immediately goes to the woman, right, and confronts her and, like, accuses her of being the one who turned George in, which it turned out to be. And she talks about the man in the dark, who comes at night, which, is that just Sims, or is this some other mystery where, like, this is the bad part of the mystery box stuff. I did not find anything interesting about this tease of another mystery character who comes, like, obviously he's part of containing all the secrets, he's part of not letting the truth spread about the outside world, all that stuff that we've already been doing, but it felt like this was teasing some, like, serious, dangerous character who could just be Sims still. But honestly, when she started talking about this, it felt like the show was dangling another mystery in front of me. And I think the problem is that it, once again, it's just a character telling me this. There's no visual to this. There's no, the classic adage of show don't tell. It's not always 100% accurate. Sometimes getting a glimpse of information from someone saying something can be good, but there's an issue when it just keeps being that. And I think there's nothing about anything she says here that doesn't just feel like you're trying to just give me another mystery to try and care about. Like, the writing of this show has been kind of revealing itself over the last 3 episodes to not really know how to actually mix the mysteries in to character stories where the character stories directly affect things. I think the big thing right now is that not only am I not that fussed about the murder investigation of George, and I never have been, right? And that would be one thing if that was, I think, more entertaining to watch and engaging to watch along the way, until we got to a point where Juliet cares about the larger mystery. But maybe she does now after seeing this book, because it seems to be an emotional moment for her. But up until now, like the actual greater mystery of what's the truth of the silo and all that is kind of just not something that seems to be that much at the forefront of her mind. She doesn't really care all that much. I'm sure she will more as she finds out more stuff. And again, maybe after this book, at the end of this episode, she'll already be at that point. But right now, she's not interested in what I'm interested in. And to make matters worse, I don't think her pursuing what she's interested in up until this point has been all that compelling. I've really struggled with just the scenes of her going to talk to someone, the scenes with her bickering with Billings, and I get that she's not meant to be good at this job yet because she's not actually trained to be a sheriff or anything like that, but at a certain point it does kind of feel like I'm watching her just kind of fumble her way through encounters with people a lot. You know, the scene early on in this episode where she goes to the judge and Sims is there and she's trying to make her case. You know, she's planted the Pez dispenser on the guy from last episode's apartment, and you know, I guess it's slightly interesting that like Judicial has like a record of every artifact of every relic that's in the silo, including this Pez dispenser, to the point where the file that he looks at on the computer actually says, I think, dispenser on it, maybe even Pez dispenser. Like, he knows what this is. If anything, like I get that relics are rare and they're really sought after and mysterious to these people, but I did think it was a little bit funny how multiple characters like just know exactly what her watch is in this episode. I get why the woman knows because it was a watch that she's seen before, but the fact that Sims is like, oh yeah, that watch belongs to the man that was dead and you have it now, and you know, I don't know, like it got to a point where I'm like, okay, there's still enough relics that it's hard to believe that he remembers them that well. I guess he probably was looking at this one recently because he was looking into George and, you know, probably had him killed. So yeah, maybe it's just fresh on his mind, but it felt like I was getting a lot of that this episode. So yeah, I guess that's obviously the other big thing I have to talk about is right at the very end, after the book, right? So Juliet's looking at the book and she's having this emotional moment with the oceans, with the fish, the dolphin, I think it was, rather than fish, but and she's looking at all this stuff and the camera pulls back, and it's so funny to me that another show that was accused of being a bit of a hollow mystery box, which was 1899, had a very similar moment at the end of an episode. Just like this one, where it pulled back and it was like a screen. But 1899, I actually, at this point, I would say is the much better show. It was relatively hollow compared to Dark and compared to like better like mystery box shows that have actual good stuff going on, but at least that never slowed down. That show kept up the pace and kept on like opening the box constantly, at the very least. This show is like dragging its feet at this point. But key things here. So she's being watched. There's a camera in her room, in her apartment, and the camera pulls out to reveal someone's watching. It's these two guys that just work here, and they say, wake him up, he needs to see this. Now, the most obvious interpretation of this is that they're just talking about Sims, and this is just something that Judicial has put in her place. That said, though, I did kind of notice that the technology of these monitors looked a lot more modern and high-tech than the rest of the show. You know, most of the screens that we've seen in the silo that they're using, the computer screens and stuff, they look kind of like ancient computers. They look like old tech. These were flat screen monitors, and it felt a little bit more, and it could just be that Judicial has better equipment than the rest of the silo. That's possible. But part of me was wondering if this was actually teasing that this is all an experiment and that there are people watching all of this unfold in the real world, and this is actually like a control center for the entire silo that's separate from the silo. This is like regular people who are in here, and this is their job to watch this experiment and keep an eye on things. I might be jumping the gun with that, I don't know, but just because of the way the computer monitors looked, it felt a little different to the rest of the place. And that's always been something that's been in my head since the start of this show, is that this all might just be one big weird social experiment that's been going on for a long ass time. But I mean, we'll see. I mean, maybe there's a purpose to it. They're looking for a cure for something, or they're hoping that eventually it'll show how to avoid conflict by having this society. But obviously, it's failing miserably because there's all these conspiracies and people killing each other and sneaking into bedrooms and threatening people and all sorts. Yeah, I think my big problem for the last couple episodes is that I don't think the murder mysteries and the investigations are well done. I think they're really dull and really tedious. I think the investigation of George and the threatening men try to keep a lid on things, and like, you know, the mysterious man who comes and threatens George's girlfriend, I think all that stuff is completely uninteresting. I don't give a shit about any of it. And all of these scenes were a pain to watch. And sadly, that's the majority of this episode. If it's not that, it's the flashbacks to Juliet and George, which I didn't think added anything by and large. She has one small interaction again with the guy who was looking at the stars, who seems to be flirting with her, who came up to see her. I was actually thinking that when she was looking through the book, she might get to a page with stars. You know, she might get to a page where it's like, you know, the night sky, and maybe it would actually say on the page what they are, and she would maybe go and tell this guy. You know, she'd bring it up that that's what they're called, or maybe that's what they're called. But like, yeah, the idea of a society that doesn't even know what all these things are because I've never seen them, and how monumentally profound that would be to see that, is one of the ideas that's interesting about the concept. But goddamn, everything else around it in this episode was a chore to sit through. I did not have a good time with this episode in the slightest. It reminds me a lot of some Netflix shows which it'll set up some good plot stuff in the first episode or two, and then it'll grind to a halt as it's just kind of killing time and not wanting to advance anything until maybe the last episode of the season. It really feels like that right now. I would flat out say I disliked this episode, and I wasn't really that hot in the last two, so I mean, we'll see. We're 6 out of 10 now. You know, I should probably see it through to the end of the season, so I'll try. But I don't think I want to. At this point, I am so disinterested in what most of this show is. I could happily call it quits, and the only reason why I'm not, potentially, is just to finish out the series of reviews, just because it's been a while since we actually had a season that I wanted to finish. So we should probably do that. Yeah, this wasn't good. This was not a good episode. Which is a string of not good episodes. Any excitement the show was mustering in the first 3 episodes feels like a distant relic in and of itself at this point. So anyway, that has been my thoughts on episode 6 of the show. Thank you very much for joining me. Keep watching TV. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. I'll see you guys soon. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?